Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We begin with Allah's blessed name. We praise Him and we glorify Him as He ought to be praised and glorified. And we pray for peace and for blessings on all His noble messengers, and in particular the last of them all, the blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, as we greet you on this, the fourth day of the new month of Jumadil Akhirah, from my sitting room here in my native island of Trinidad in the Caribbean, with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You'll have to forgive me that I need to keep on sipping at the time when I'm speaking, because I have a dryness in the mouth, and that's causing the smacking of the lips. Today's talk is entitled, it's an ominous one, but I am connecting the dots. That's what Allah has gifted me with. Allah has gifted me, this is His kindness to me, with insight. He gave it to my father as well, rahimahullah, and He gave it to me, the insight with which to be able to connect the dots, and I can see clearly now. Rain is not falling at all. I can see clearly now that Israel is taking the world to nuclear war. And so our topic is Israel is taking the world to nuclear war. And when that war does take place, no one knows at all how many will die. No one knows how many parts of the world are going to be utterly destroyed, and no one can live there anymore. We don't know, because we never had such a war before in history. But what we do know is it would not be the end of mankind on earth, not at all, because our Islamic eschatology, excuse me, I have this cough still here with me, I'm trying to battle with it. Our Islamic eschatology tells me of many events which will occur after the Great War. And of course, my viewers are well aware that I have told you of what our Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, has prophesied, that after the Great War, the next event which will take place, whether Turkey accepts it or they don't, is irrelevant. The next event which will take place after the Great War, as prophesied by Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, is the conquest of Constantinople. That's why they changed the name, so that they could hide this prophecy. But we're bringing it back into the sunshine. And of course, we have explained why a Muslim army is going to conquer Constantinople. And when we told them why, they were crying in the University of Belgrade. The auditorium was packed full. 99% of them were Orthodox Christians. Less than 1% in that gathering were Muslims. And they were crying when they heard that when that great war takes place and the Muslim army conquers Constantinople, then we will return Hagia Sophia, the cathedral of Hagia Sophia, to those to whom it rightfully belongs. And no one will be able to stop that. So now then, when will the Great War take place? Of course, only Allah has all knowledge. Only Allah. But we have the right to seek to anticipate when we connect the dots. Of course, those who are going to trigger the Great War, they know when they're going to do it. But we have to go to the subject of the Antichrist, because the Great War is connected with the Antichrist, or Dajjal, the false Messiah. They don't teach this subject in universities. And our brothers in Christian eschatology do not have as much information about the Antichrist as we have in Islamic eschatology. And we share it with them in a fraternal way. There is no boxing match, not at all. There is no rivalry, not at all. We are brothers to each other, and we are the two people on the face of the earth who believe as a matter of fate that the Messiah came, that the Messiah left, and that the Messiah will return. And so now, when we turn to the subject of the Antichrist in Islamic eschatology, we find that the Quran refers to him, and this is an ayah mutashabiha, meaning a verse which has to be interpreted to be understood. And when we interpret the Quran, we know that only Allah can confirm that an interpretation can be correct. And so when we interpret the Quran, there is no boxing match. And an interpretation of the Quran must not be used to divide the believers at all. So we interpret, but we say Allah knows best. If our interpretation is correct, it will become truth and it will survive. And if our interpretation is wrong, as I have been wrong in the past, and I'm always happy to say I made a mistake. But when I make a mistake, I must be the first to rush to correct myself at all. There must be no pride in trying to hide my mistakes, not at all. That's not the way of scholarship. And so the Quran has told us, if you make a mistake when making an interpretation, you still will get blessings for the effort that you made, inshallah. But tomorrow, it will go down the river of no return. It will be forgotten. And so now in the Quran, in Surah Al-Mursalat, we have identified this verse. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم انطلقوا إلى ظل ذي ثلاث شعب. It must be about 10, 15 years ago when I identified this verse as relating to the Antichrist. Proceed, says the Quran, to a shadow which will comprise of 3 parts. Proceed to a shadow which will comprise of 3 parts. And I say, and Allah knows best, this refers to the Antichrist, to the Dajjal. I see the same thing in Christian eschatology when they have 3 parts, 6 and 60 and 600, so 666. But in our eschatology, we have a prophecy of Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessing be upon him, which is in harmony with this verse of the Quran. He said that when the Antichrist is released into the world, he will live on the earth for 40 days. One day would be like a year, meaning a long, long period of time. One day would be like a month, meaning in the second phase or the second stage, it will be shorter. One day which will be like a week, meaning that in the third stage of the life of the Antichrist, it will be a very short span of time. وَالسَّائِرُ أَيَّامِهِ كَأَيَّامِكُمْ. And despite the fact, now listen carefully to this, because this is the first time I'm explaining it this way. Despite the fact that the first day is like a year, and the second day is like a month, and the third day is like a week, yet all his days are like your days. This is the first time that I am explaining this hadith this way. Now then, when I write my book on Dajjal, the Quran and time, there will be more analysis on this hadith. But for today, what we have in Islamic eschatology, and I got an email today from a Christian eschatologist, and he was commenting on this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and offering his view and interpret. This is a Christian eschatologist in contact with me. So we said that in the first stage of the Antichrist, a stage which would last for a long time, or secondly, listen carefully, in which there will be the appearance that time is moving slowly, 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 and what we are experiencing might last forever. It was in that first stage, we said, that the Antichrist, who eventually wants to rule the world from Jerusalem, with a state of Israel which will be a ruling state in the world, the Antichrist creates modern Western civilization, and within modern Western civilization, he creates, mysteriously so, a ruling state. And it was Britain. And we don't have the time now to explain Pax Britannica. And then we said that in the second stage, the Antichrist gave to the world a Pax Americana, in which the United States of America replaced Britain as the second ruling state in the world in modern Western civilization. This subject was dealt with. This is the heart of my first book in Islamic eschatology, Jerusalem in the Quran. And I want to share with you that perhaps the time has now come, because of what is happening in Gaza, and because public opinion is changing around the world, for us to try to persuade the bookshops around the world to start stocking my books, including Jerusalem and the Quran. But I have more to say about that later. And so then we said that the Antichrist still has a third stage. My Christian brother who wrote to me today is of the opinion that no, it was the Roman Empire which was stage one. And then he said it was Britannia, Pax Britannica, which was stage two, and Pax Americana is an extension of Pax Britannica. And I can't remember now what he said about stage three. Anyhow, we have the view that no, Pax Romana, or the Roman Empire, had nothing to do with the Holy Land at all, bringing the Jews back to the Holy Land at all. So we don't see the imprint of the Antichrist there in the political conduct and the military conduct of the Holy Roman Empire. But now then, we say that the third stage will be a stage in which Israel will attempt to rule the world and to establish a Pax Judaica. And then the Antichrist would complete his 3 days before we see him in person, and he would be ruling the world from Jerusalem, and then he will declare, I am the Messiah. And when he says that I am the Messiah, and you and I, who are listening to me, Christians and Muslims, and maybe some Hindus as well, we would be able to recognize him. This is the Antichrist. This is Dajjal, the false Messiah. He is not the son of Mary, of Maryam. He is the Antichrist. But our Salafi brothers will say, no, he cannot be Dajjal, because Dajjal sees with only one eye. He's blind in the right eye. He sees with his left eye. He's blind in the right eye. It looks like a bulging grape. And this man is seeing with two eyes, so he cannot be Dajjal. So we say, let Salafi people remain sitting on a sofa chair waiting for Dajjal to come, because they do not understand the mutashabihat and the capacity. They don't have the capacity to interpret the Quran. Now back to our subject. If Israel is to rule the world from Jerusalem, then Israel, and to succeed a Pax Americana, we have argued that you need a great war to do that. The passage from Pax Britannica, the emergence of Pax Britannica, required Britain to wage war continuously using the Navy, the British Navy, and the British Army land war and naval war for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. But when the time came for the passage from stage 1 to stage 2, there were two big wars. There was the First Great World War, First World War, and the Second World War. And because you and I want to connect the dots of history, we have to study political history. We have to study military history to be able to understand the Quran and to understand the prophecies of Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him. Our critics don't appear to have that interest. We saw that in the First World War, it was a false flag, an assassination of the Grand Duke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, who was assassinated in Sarajevo in the summer of 1914. But on Judgment Day, we'll get the evidence that the gunman was not acting on his own, that there was a planning behind it. There were actors behind him who targeted the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, because they wanted to use this to have a domino effect, to bring about a war which they had planned. Oh yes, they had spent a long, long time planning the First World War, long in advance. And all that they needed was the bushfire with which to start it. And that was the role of the assassination of the Grand Duke Franz Ferdinand of Sarajevo. And then the First World War took place. And we noticed in the First World War that Britain and France had approached Russia, and their purpose was to deceive Russia and take Russia for a ride. I chatted today for a long time on the phone with my dear friend Ken O'Keefe, and Ken might be listening to this lecture as well. And I explained to Ken, and he laughed. He laughed. I said, the Tsar Nicholas of Russia was a man who belonged to a family which had faith in the Lord God. They were pious Christians. But while he had faith in his heart, he didn't seem to have more than peanuts in his head. And so the British and the French were successful in deceiving Russia and establishing a triple alliance with Russia. They knew it was going to be a formidable fight. They knew that millions were going to die fighting Germany and fighting the Ottoman Empire, but because these were two massive military machines. And they didn't want Englishmen to take the brunt of the fighting, and they didn't want Frenchmen to die so many numbers on the battlefield. So they used Russia as their guinea pig. And so long as the war was prolonged, and Russia was suffering so many men being killed, and the Russian economy is in straits, difficulties, they were able to intervene and to win public opinion in Russia against the Shah. And so they attacked him with a sword both from the front and from the back. And they were able to bring about the Bolshevik Revolution. But this I'm sharing with you, as I did with Ken today, to show you how the planning took place for the First World War. And the First World War gave us a great step towards Pax Judaica, because they liberated the Holy Land from Ottoman rule, and they established a British mandate over Jerusalem and the Holy Land. And from 1917, 1918, and 1948, Britain presided over the return of Jews to the Holy Land, not Israelite Jews, who were scattered all over the world of Islam, Morocco and Iran and all these places. Not those Jews, but the others who were not a Semitic people at all. They were European people. These are the ones who were brought back to, not brought back, they're coming for the first time. European Jews were brought to the Holy Land. And then the state of Israel was established after the Second World War, in which again they deceived Hitler, and Germany made the mistake for the second time of attacking Russia. The first time they attacked Russia, it was through this Triple Alliance, and they deceived Russia, and Russia lost so many men in the First World War. But the second time it was Hitler who attacked Russia. And then after that, the State of Israel was established in 1948. And then these European Jews who now control Israel, these are the ones who by the hook or by the crook, mostly by the crook, brought all these other Jews who are Israelite Jews from Yemen, from Iran, from Morocco, from Egypt, from all over the world of Islam, where the Jews had lived for 2,000 years. We were only 1,400 years of the world of Islam. But they lived with us, and they lived with us in a harmonious state. They were not complaining. So there was no fighting, there was no enmity, there was no hatred between Muslims and Jews for all these years that the Jews were living within the world of Islam. They even lived in Constantinople, in the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire protected them. But these Jews are now deceived and brought back to the Holy Land by the European State of Israel. And then you saw how the European state of Israel, using every trick in the book, every lie, every single act of oppression you could think of, is constantly expanding and taking control of a land which never belonged to them. Throwing out the people who lived in the land for more than 1,000 years. Throwing them out. They're living now in refugee camps. And so this Israel, from day one, is an oppressor. By trickery, in an unjust way, they establish a United Nations organization, and that United Nations organization have a vote, and they say the state of Israel must be created. That's how it came into being. A United Nations organization which Europe created and which Europe controlled. And that United Nations organization created the state of Israel, taking away the land which belongs to the Christian and Muslim Palestinians, robbing them of their land in daylight robbery to create a new state in that land. And from that day to this day, that Israel has been oppressor. Now we have Jews responding to me on the internet and arguing with me, but they don't give their identity. They hide behind a pseudonym, cowards, and trying to argue with our view of Islamic eschatology. Let them come. We're happy to combat with them, to do intellectual combat with them on the internet. But I'm not going to share a platform with a Jew who supports the state of Israel. You can't have a friendly dialogue with me. Forget it. And so now, what has been happening is that in order for this Israel to replace the United States of America as the next ruling state in the world, so that the Antichrist would have his third stage of his mission, a day like a week. This Israel is prepared to trigger the Great War. Why? Number one, to substantially reduce the population of the world. And I am not the only voice speaking about this. No, there are so many others already saying the same thing, and they're not saying it from the perspective of Islamic eschatology at all. That there is a plan afoot to substantially reduce the population of the world. They might say, well, there are too many cockroaches in the world. We have to get rid of all of these cockroaches. We are the chosen people of the Lord God. But secondly, there are two major powers in the world now. There used to be the Soviet Union, and there used to be the Western Alliance. And then when the Soviet Union folded its tent and disappeared into the darkness of the night, then a Russia emerged, mysteriously so, which returned to Russia's Orthodox Christian heart. And once that happened, then China was the first in the world to have the insight and to have the political acumen to recognize that this Russia is not a rival to China. The previous Soviet Union was a rival to China, but this Russia is not a rival to China. Indeed, China came to the conclusion very rapidly that this Russia can be trusted while the West cannot be trusted. And so China reached out to this Russia after the Soviet Union was folded its tent and disappeared into the darkness of the night. And Russia responded to the Chinese initiative, and an alliance between Russia and China emerged. And this alliance became a formidable military and political and economic bloc in the world, rivaling the West, rivaling NATO. And now we see, in fact, that Russia is the greatest military power in the world today. But Israel wants a great war between these two giants, because Israel is calculating that a war, a nuclear war between the China-Russia alliance and NATO, will be a war of mutual destruction. And when these two major superpowers are destroyed, mutually destroyed in a nuclear war, and the population of the world is substantially reduced, that Israel will now have a chance to claim to be the new ruling state in the world. Nothing that I have said today is new to you. You knew this long ago. Those of you who have been listening to me, and those of you who have been thinking. But there are others, they eat the biryani and go home to sleep. They're not concerned so much with the hunger for knowledge. And there are others who just discovered me, and they're probably hearing this for the first time. But there are so many of you who already know this. Now then, what is now happening, the connecting the dots, is that although the Great War has not as yet taken place, Israel knew that the attack by the Islamic resistance, which occurred, was it in October? Was it October? Yeah. That Israel knew it was coming. And I held the view that Israel was observing the movement of weapons into Gaza. It is not that Israel was ignorant. They knew about it. I held the view that Israel thought that the massive transfer of weapons that were taking place to Ukraine afforded an opportunity for Israel to assist in getting a part of this huge surplus of weapons going to Ukraine, to a Ukraine which was willing to sell for money. And you could go in the market and buy, the black market, you could buy these weapons. And so weapons were bought. And Putin he spoke about this, and he revealed that this is what happened. This is the president of Russia. That these weapons which were intended for Ukraine were sold in the black market, and they reached Gaza. And Israel knew how they reached Gaza. So Israel was aware that this attack was coming. On Judgment Day, the evidence will be there that I am absolutely correct in my analysis. On Judgment Day, you'll see it. But we don't have to wait for Judgment Day, because there are many people around the world who already agree with me that Israel had a knowledge that the attack was coming. Why did Israel allow the attack to take place? Notice I never used the Arabic acronym for the Islamic resistance. That Arabic acronym that I never mentioned actually means in English the Islamic resistance. That's what it means. So I prefer to use the term the Islamic resistance, which is in contrast to the secular nationalist Palestinian resistance of the PLO, which was headed by Yasser Arafat. That's a secular resistance, and this is the Islamic resistance. And so when the Islamic resistance emerged, of obviously, these are the terrorists, these are the terrorists, these are the terrorists. And the secular resistance, oh no, they're the good guys now. It's so funny. So I don't use the Arabic acronym. I call it the Islamic resistance. And the Islamic resistance then launched the attack on Israel. More than 1,000 Israelis were killed, and their lives could have been saved if Israel had warned them, at least warned them the attack is coming. As there were those who were warned in advance that 9/11 was going to take place, and so they didn't go to work on that day. But they didn't do that at this time. So these people lost their lives, and so many of them were taken as prisoners of war, or they call them hostages. Now then, I asked in my first response, why did Israel do this? And then I felt that what Israel was doing was trying to use this as an opportunity to trigger a big war with Iran. This was my first impression, and that Israel will try to provoke Hezbollah to become a party to the war, and once Hezbollah enters the war, then the road will be clear to Iran, and Israel's target was Iran. This is my first response, and now it is clear that I was wrong. I was wrong. I misread the situation. I believe that that was not the major plan. The major plan was to use this opportunity by Israel to clear the whole of Gaza, to make Gaza free of Palestinians, to throw them out of Gaza, and make it impossible for them to live in Gaza anymore, so that Israel will be rid of this problem. Throw them where? Throw them in Sinai, but Sinai belongs to Egypt. So you need the Egyptian government to agree to that. Or let them go and live in Egypt, or let them go somewhere live in the world of Islam. All the Palestinians. So Israel responded to the attack by the Islamic resistance because they responded with a pre-planned operation whose objective it was to liberate the whole of Gaza, remove all the Palestinians, using terror, not just Islamic resistance. The fact is, every Muslim and every Christian in Gaza is a threat to Israel. And so now, what we've been seeing these last 2 months is Israel's oppression constantly increasing. And now they plan their plan, but Allah plans His plans. And in the same way, that look at what happened with the Soviet Union, which was an evil state, an atheist state, oppressing the Christians, oppressing the Muslims, oppressing the religious way of life. And yet the Soviet Union was able to transform Russia overnight into a highly scientific and technologically advanced country, willing and capable to become a formidable, the most powerful military force in the world. So too, it seems to me as though Allah's plan is at work in Gaza, that the more that Israel attacks Gaza, the greater the injustice, the more that Israel becomes isolated in the world. Most of mankind today, despite the fact that the media around the world has always been used for propaganda in favor of the Western world and in favor of Israel, despite all of that propaganda, all these decades, today public opinion around the world is moving more and more in favor of the oppressed Palestinians and against Israel. And if you look at the voting in the United Nations Security Council and in the United Nations General Assembly, I believe there was a resolution today. I don't know what has happened in the Security Council today, but the last time the Security Council voted, it was the United States which cast the solitary vote, only one country in the world, in support of Israel. But because the United States is a permanent member of the Security Council, it had a veto power. But now today, I don't know what happened today. It's possible that the United States must have voted in favor of a resolution asking Israel to stop the fighting, to have a pause in the fighting. When you go to the General Assembly of the United Nations, we see that 150-something countries around the world adopted a resolution asking Israel to stop, and only 10 voted in favor of Israel. The 10 were United States, and the other 9, I can't remember the name because they're so unimportant. And so I'm concluding this talk by saying to you that Israel is becoming more and more isolated in the world. That even Britain and France are now asking Israel to stop the fighting. So what's going to happen? Answer: those who want Pax Judaica will now realize that the United Nations is no longer an asset. The United Nations has now become a liability. Number 2, that maybe the time is approaching soon, because Israel is becoming more and more isolated, for them to trigger the next world war. How will it be triggered? I don't know, but it's going to be a false flag. But when it is triggered, I believe it'll take Russia by surprise. It will take China by surprise, and it probably will also take NATO by surprise. Because it is not NATO, it is not China, it is not Russia who wants the Great War, the nuclear war. It is Pax Judaica. Those who want Pax Judaica, they are the ones who will trigger off the Great War. And I am recording this video because of my connecting the dots, and because I have a duty as your brother, studying Islamic eschatology while the others are eating the biryani and couscous and going home and sleeping. I have a duty to you to share with you my analysis when I connect the dots that Israel is now taking mankind to the nuclear war. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.